Don't want to hear about tennis balls?
I think it's always appropriate to let people know that you are full human beings with lovely dogs and exciting extracurricular activities. So you're live.
So we're good to go?
You are good to go.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Tuesday special sort of Finance Committee meeting this morning. What we'd like to do, and again, Larissa, maybe, do we have guests that have joined us on any of our formats?
We do have a couple of attendees that are here with you on Zoom. We have a couple of members of the school board and also school administrative staff.
Okay, so maybe, I think if you could just, we always do at the beginning of all these meetings, but just kind of repeat the
Sure.
process, if you will, a little bit about for those that do reach us.
So if you decide to join us here on Zoom as an attendee, please just raise your hand using the raise hand feature. If you have a comment, the chair of this committee, Councillor Hayes, will take public comment towards the end of the meeting, tends to be when that happens. And if you have a question regarding what you're seeing, if you're watching us on YouTube, then please email that into towncouncil@scarboroughmaine.org.
So I guess with that, I'd like to call this to order. And I think, Colette, if you could just kind of do your usual, those in attendance this evening, or this morning, I guess.
This morning, 10 a.m. Councillor Hayes.
Here, present.
Councillor Gleistein.
Here.
Councillor Clucci.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 3 is the approval of the minutes from June 16th. Do I have a motion for approval?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I haven't had a chance to look at them from the 16th. So
Okay.
I propose waiting.
Well-
Just a second, and then I'll vote no, because I haven't looked at them.
Yeah, I can second. I think I can second. Can I, by rules of order? Somebody? Yeah, so I'll second. And with that, is there any discussion of those minutes? Betsy, I fully appreciate you haven't had a chance to see them. So I think if you have any edits or suggestions, we will take that into account. But for now, does anybody have any comments? John, do you have anything on them?
No, I don't have any comments. Colette did include them with an email this morning if you wanted to take a quick look, Betsy. They're pretty detailed, actually.
Right, I saw the email. I just didn't have time to look at them.
That's okay. They're pretty straightforward. It's like maybe, we can take a vote on them, and then Betsy, if you have any edits, we can get them in. So Colette, you want to kind of take us through?
Certainly. Councillor Hayes.
Yes.
Councillor Clucci.
Yes.
Councillor Gleistein.
Abstain.
Thank you.
And then Betsy, if you have anything, just let us know and we can edit them appropriately.
Sounds good.
And I think with that, then the next item is really going to be the gist of this meeting, and the heart of this meeting is really kind of, we met earlier this week. We had gone through several recommendations that were made by the town manager. We discussed them. We wanted to come back. We wanted to have an opportunity for the Board of Education to have their meeting last night to see if they made any adjustments or had any conversations around some of the things that we had talked about. I don't believe that they did. So I think with that, Tom, you want to kind of walk us through again, sort of where we are and what remaining items for us to discuss?
Certainly, and very much appreciate the extra few days to fine tune the numbers. I thought this would be an easy exercise. Ruth and I were at it most of the intervening hours from your last meeting, but are confident that we've kind of trued things up. The numbers have changed slightly from kind of that high level presentation, but certainly they're all in concept, all in keeping. And a couple of the changes had to do with moving things from appropriated to bonding and revenue impacts and the like. And we can certainly focus on those very minor changes. But what we've presented to you today is essentially what I reviewed with you earlier this week on Tuesday. And Peter, as you said, the school board did take second reading last night. I can't verify it firsthand, but I'm not aware that there were any changes beyond what their finance committee had recommended to the full board. So there's really no material change that I'm aware of at this point. Having said that, I think it's certainly your prerogative as town finance committee to do what you wish in terms of passing on a recommendation to the full council. And in that regard, I do recommend that you consider what we've put together and what there seemed to be some conceptual consensus for earlier this week. The format that we've put together just probably would benefit us all if I just oriented everyone to the document that's before you. And Larissa, could you share that screen? So this format, I think by now is somewhat familiar with you. It's the one that I've been kind of carrying throughout your deliberations. And so this list of projects on the first page or line items, again, should be fairly familiar territory. I did add the final 2 items on that list, the first list, and those came forward for the first time earlier this week. That's the town's portion of the debt savings for the advanced refunding.
Hey, Tom,
Yes.
is there any way, Larissa, as she's doing that, can you highlight or just somehow, could she highlight the things that we talked about this week that were the new items, if you will?
I can't highlight, Peter, but can you see my cursor?
Yep, I can see your cursor.
Okay, so I can do that. That's the extent of the highlighting opportunity I have.
Okay, when we get, okay, go ahead, Tom, and then maybe, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so from the running list, and this list has been kind of built over time through the course of your deliberations as finance committee, but the 2 most recent additions are where her pointer is right now. It's the town's portion of advanced refunding savings, and that's 46,538. You may recall that earlier, I just had the bulk savings, if you will. We now know what the allocation is between town and school, and we've attributed it appropriately. Yep. And then the final item there is the fire EMS contract savings of 52,000. That's shown as an adjustment as well.
And that was what we ratified at the town council meeting.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. So now we can legitimately do that. I was a bit presumptuous on Tuesday morning, but now it's good to go. I don't recall that there were any changes on the revenue portion.
Hey, Tom,
yes.
I want to make sure that I'm reading this correctly. This was from the first read, right? Which when we took the first read, we went through the list of things the town had already done before first read to bring the first read budget. So this doesn't even really represent all of the reductions. This is just what we've done since first read. Is that
correct? Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, Councillor. I'd like to prepare a separate slide, and I think it would be appropriate to do it for your second reading to really show that progression.
Yeah.
We did take advantage of the opportunity with the delayed start of the budget process to do some really hard looking at our budget.
Right.
And then made further adjustments in first reading. And now this list is really focusing on what's happened since first reading.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm it. Thank you.
Yeah. And again, just the kind of data points that we wanted to report in big picture is first reading, and then what adjustments you're considering now and where that ends up with. But there are other data points that we can fill in around this, and I will before next Wednesday, if that's helpful.
And Tom, just as a placeholder for folks that are listening, that prior to first read, some of the things that Betsy is just referencing, it was more than $1 million, wasn't it, that you took out?
I believe it was. Yep. I reported that earlier on, and I will bring that forward and provide a clearer picture of that.
That's great.
Yeah.
I think it was 2.7 million, Peter.
Was it? Wow. Okay.
Well, 2.7 is the total reduction at first reading.
Yeah.
2 million roughly was school related. 765, as I recall, was town related. But I think that to the point, there were a lot of changes on the town side even before that, even
Yeah.
before the budget was presented, and I'll document those for you.
I think that slide would be important to have. So that's great, Tom, to have it.
Sure.
a
Yep,
second. That'd be
we'll
great.
clean that up and have that for you.
Thank you.
Tom, I
So-
think the only question that I had on this slide was the beach revenue police. Was that the amount added back in because we are going to have the officers at Higgins Beach? Or can you refresh me on that one?
You could suggest that. Councillor Hayes is the one that brought it to my attention. In the current year, we are bringing in $30,000 in beach reserves to offset beach enforcement and patrols. I had not done that in my proposed budget. He, I think, correctly asked the question why, and I said, no reason, we can do that. So I wouldn't say it's directly related to Higgins Beach because I've demonstrated, I think, that can cover itself and then some in terms of fines and other revenue sources. It does not seem like an inappropriate thing to do. We do make a fairly heavy investment at the beach area, and arguably without that attractive nuisance at the beach, we wouldn't have these expenses. So to the extent we have separate non-property tax revenues to help offset some of those expenses, that seems appropriate.
Yeah, John, I think how we got there is as we started to look at the line item budgets in public safety, we looked at the number for Higgins Beach and what it cost, and we were looking to cut those hours back to be like the other beaches. And then that's through that process, we realized that there wasn't this revenue hadn't been applied to that. So it was part of the conversation from prior years that the additional resources are covered by the additional parking fee or beach reserves are the way that we financed it last year.
Okay.
So just a couple final points on this slide for me. So what this amounts to, since first reading, we're looking at a total adjustment on the appropriation side of $793,097, and you'll see that it's the total of that listing. With the exception of one, they're all reductions. I am proposing that we add $3,000 back in for diversity training in light of some of our challenges nationwide. But that's the only exception. Everything else are reductions. And then on the revenue side, there's a kind of a mixed bag. We have some new revenue, but significant revenue reductions as well. And so the net of that process from the revenue perspective reduces overall revenues by $563,460.
And Peter, I have a comment on this too,
Yeah.
make sure I'm understanding it, because there's been a lot of active community engagement, which I think most people know I really appreciate, regardless of whether where people stand on something. I definitely want to hear it. But there's been some, I don't want to say insinuation, that's sort of a loaded word, but that we're trying to use revenues to drive down where we're bringing the budget at. But I want to point out that we're pretty much saying that we think revenues in the form of excise taxes, building permits, fees, and all of that are going to stay flat. We've, as a matter of fact, said that's going to go up by about 0.2%. So that's a conservative estimate based on what could happen with the economy. So I think people should be aware of that. And then we're still saying that we will get a 51% increase from the state for homestead exemption this year. Folks I'm talking to are saying, a lot of the state stuff is at risk, but people should understand that we're still estimating that we're going to get a 51% increase in that. We're estimating that we're going to get a refund from the business equipment tax is going to stay flat. And again, that's a risk too, because business equipment tax is as Larissa explained to me, it's hard to estimate, but businesses are the ones we know that may be hurt. So hopefully, we had a local factory who was here for dozens of years who's going to close down. Hopefully somebody will move in to take over those business equipment. We know Abbott's expanding. So, we're being conservative on that. We're not saying we're going to get more, but we're not saying we're going to get less. And then, finally, we say that for municipal state sharing, we're still going to get 11.7% more than we got last year. So again, I think, we've tried to find that balance. I think Peter and I have been more on the side of saying, hey, wait, this picture could be a lot worse. I think John and maybe Tom and some others have been saying, it might not be so bad. That's what the back and forth is about. I think we've tried to strike a balance here. We've listened to our town manager, but, for people to say that we're cutting revenues, revenue estimates, so that we can get the budget down, I think the numbers belie that is not accurate. Thank you.
Just if I could, I'm a bit concerned. I just want to say it on the record. I've heard Councillor Gleistine say a couple times earlier this week and just now, you've asked my opinion. This is your budget. These are your estimates to do what you will with. You've asked my opinion. I've given it. I welcome any and all other opinions. And so I just want to be clear that, I do not have the crystal ball. And,
right.
I'm giving you the best guess estimate I have given the circumstances we're in. So
right. And that's where I'm at. I think, like I say, I think there was a lot of back and forth. I think you guys jumped in, you did the analysis that, you felt was appropriate. And, we landed on this place, and I respect your opinion and where we've landed. I just think it's not accurate. Some folks who are saying that we're trying to use revenue to make cuts. We're not,
Fair enough. No, your point's well taken there, Councillor. So the net effect of all those changes is reducing the total budget by $229,637 on the municipal side. And it's worth noting that, I just want to make sure that we're mindful of the different components that come into that number of 229,637 is not all that awe-inspiring, but I think you all appreciate what it took to get there. There were significant cuts on the expense side, and I think some thoughtful analysis and reductions in revenues on the other side. It produces, a fairly modest number, but there's a lot of work packed into that number for sure, and I think all of you appreciate that. So carrying on to the next page, the same format.
Tom, before we leave the municipal side, I just want to make sure, at least, there's so many numbers, so many things back and forth. This does not include, at this point in time, this budget that we'll be talking about today does not include the senior tax credit at this point. Is that correct?
That's correct. You'll see it on the subsequent slide here.
Okay. And then two, it also doesn't carry any funding for the library expansion at this point, because it was a bonded issue. Then they were going to put it in appropriations, but we haven't put it in appropriations yet. So that's not on this list either.
Correct. I think I just misspoke though. This does, and you'll see in a moment, this does include the reduction of $58,000 for the senior property tax. It does not include, based on your decisions earlier this week, any funding for library work.
So it does include the funding of the increase in the senior tax credit?
Yeah, Larissa, if you could just advance to
I think that
the final slide in this format. Here you go. Back up. One more.
I had thought we'd never put that in the budget as a formal act of either the finance committee or the town council. So,
Larissa, one down, please. Right there. I included the 58,000 additional monies in my original proposed budget, and they survived through first reading. I'm showing them coming out here, and I think Councillor Clucci acknowledged the fact that the council really hasn't reconciled that matter. So that's a point of some discussion for sure. But in my numbers, in my calculation, I'm carrying that being reduced by that amount.
Okay, that's what I thought. You've got it. So in your numbers that we're talking about right now, it's staying at the same level that it currently is.
Correct.
Is that a fair statement?
That is.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, so back up one more, Larissa. Thank you. Sorry about that. So really, we wanted to carry through, and this is this display or presentation is really modeled after the different components that that we report on our tax rate comp sheet. And I guess we got to go one more, Larissa. Sorry. No, the other way. Here we go. So first page dealt with municipal, moving down, now looking at the education budget, you'll see a reduction. This is a reduction that I believe the School Board Finance Committee brought forward to you on the 9th and was carried on my presentation earlier this week on the 16th. So I've simply booked that number, if you will. As you recall, pardon?
Just a quick question. The sheet that I have that we reviewed this week, though, I thought that number was 76,820. Or is that?
No, you are correct. I wonder, Ruth, could you explain what the difference there is? If you know. Ruth?
I believe at the time, no, I guess I don't know what it is.
I'm just looking at the
Oh, I think it had, no, I don't know what it is. I don't remember. I think we talked about it earlier, but
I think if we can get together with Kate Bolton, we can reconcile that piece. You know, it's a $6,000 difference.
Yes, it's not much money. I just wanted to make sure we're talking the same item that we had looked at on the 9th.
We are. The intent is, and what we would do for certain is to reflect what the School Board Finance Committee and what I believe the BOE did in second reading last night. We'll book whatever that number is.
Okay.
And I apologize for that.
No worries. There's so many numbers. I'm just trying to make sure we're tracking with what's in, what's out, and where we are.
Fair enough. And then the exercise that we undertook earlier this week was to identify savings across the budgets for purposes of really making certain that we're covering the pandemic costs. So we're showing, funding this fully. And I think that's a real important component to be talking about. There seems to be still some confusion in the community that that money is not provided for. So I'm hopeful we can address that concern effectively over the next several weeks.
I went on a hunt trying to figure out what number was included at first reading for pandemic costs. And I struggled to locate those documents, but I think that might be something that's worth including where you show the first reading number. There was actually a pandemic.
Yeah, fair enough.
Cost.
About 430, I think, John.
That sounds about right, but I just couldn't find the document.
Right.
No,
yeah.
that's a great point. 430 sticks in my mind. We can confirm that, but you're right. We should be providing for, because I think Councilor Hayes has made this point, and many of you, that there has been money since first reading for this right along. And so that's a good point. We'll identify that number and include that in the first reading column here where it says 0.
Yeah, Tom, I think the Board of Education did give us a number in their memo to us of what they wanted for pandemic funding. I think everything was included in the first read, except for I think they had removed the 3 bus drivers. And I think the 3 bus drivers were about 126,000. So that 430 number, it seems to be in the ballpark, I think.
Yep, we'll confirm it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good, thanks. Good call, John. Thank you.
And then again, from the school side, there was a slight reduction on we've combined adult ed and school nutrition. I think the reduction was actually on
for adult ed.
For adult ed specifically. I can't explain what that was, but again, we're just booking that savings.
I do have the difference on that 70,000 for the school, if you want.
Please.
So initially it was the 76,820. There was an adjustment, and I'm not sure what that is. It was of $64,099 that was added back. And then $57,929 was the actual amount of the advance refunding for the school's portion. So if you subtract the 76,820, add in 64,099, and then back out 57,929 for the advance, that comes to the 70,650.
And just another question, because, kudos to everyone who's tracking the exact number, because when I saw the 533 this morning, I did think, well, I thought it was 556, but I didn't have time to go track that back down. But Sarah just just asked via chat why that's 533, 820 now instead of 556, which is, I believe, what it's been since June 9th.
I
Yeah.
think at the June 16th meeting on Tom's sheet, the amount of the savings that were seen on that sheet equaled 533, 820. So we just added that back in
All right,
too.
gotcha. All right, thank you.
Yeah, it's the things that we had talked about that we had identified as potential adjustments to get us there. We did talk about if there was remaining balance to be funded, that, you know, that would be something that would be on the operational budget of the Board of Education.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. My exercise took us as close as I could. And I think we did discuss openly that it is slightly short and you could fill that gap if you wished.
Yeah, I'm recalling it now.
Yep.
So
So does that make sense,
I'm
this sheet?
still confused about the 70,000, but you guys can sort through that. For now, let's assume those numbers work out. So
Yeah, I'm quite hearing Ruth's explanation. It really has to do with what I presented to you last week. We've since allocated the actual debt service savings. And so that's the difference there.
gotcha.
So
Oh, okay.
I think that's the correct number.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay, I understand now. Okay.
Ruth, do you know what was added back in the 64099? Do you know what that was for?
No, I don't have those numbers. I think school probably has those.
We have the
I
number,
would-
we just don't know the detail.
Right.
And then the last sheet goes on to capital, and this was a vexing problem for us just to kind of reconcile all the moving parts, but we're confident we have it now. So based on what I proposed, we've done some fine-tune detail, and I don't know if we've actually met exactly what Councillor Gleistein was looking for, but we have prepared two details that we'll take a look at here for both town capital and school capital that will show you some of the particulars. But what's reported here is just kind of the high level, the rolled up number, if you will. So you'll see, based on your, I'll say, direction as from consensus, there were changes on the municipal capital budget of 1.688 million.
Can you go through what those were? I know it's the bulk of that's the turf field. You've got a schedule of what we did take.
Yeah, Larissa, just scroll ahead two more. There you go. So this is the entirety of what's remaining on the school capital, excuse me, town capital. There's only one appropriated item for $10,000 that has always been there and is still there. But your direction as of earlier this week was to remove the turf and track project, the 2669 numbers, and then also the what still was being shown as 350 for the library building expansion. You might recall they have, after the budget was presented, come back with a lower number, but we hadn't made any formal change yet. So that still exists in the budget, and so that totals those three items totaled that $1,688,000 change in municipal capital.
And Betsy and John, is that your recollection? Are you guys comfortable with that on the municipal capital side? That's.
It is. I did have a question. So, the 1.2, I think people, if I understood everything, need to understand that will go to the voters. Once the town council determines to put it on the referendum. But that has to be in as a placeholder in case it gets approved in November. And then the 867, that's not a capital piece of equipment, right, Tom? So that won't have to go to the voters. That's ongoing maintenance that we're doing for the roads.
It doesn't go to the voters because it qualifies as an exclusion in, I think it's section 907.1 of the charter that speaks to voter approval. So it's a public works project and thereby exempt from that process.
So really, we're talking about 2.2. I mean about 1.2, and the voters get to approve an additional 1.2 that we're putting out there. And I think people might be interested to look at the the capital plan and see what we have delayed. This isn't a 1 year blow when we have to delay capital for financial reasons like we're having to do in the pandemic. This is a multi-year, this is something that's we're gonna feel this over multiple years. So I think, folks need to understand that and what that they still have, the vote on a portion of this as well.
Mhm.
But the list is large and it's all now sitting in FY22, but it's not going to be able to happen all in FY22 either. It just, we move it over and then it's going to have to be, figured out what we can do in each progressive year, as we see how this thing unfolds. But, there's a lot to getting this number down to where it is.
Correct. And to the earlier point, I essentially decimated our capital budget before you even saw it. And so as part of what I'll report to you is, what came to me by way of department requests and what didn't, what was left on the cutting room floor before the budget was even presented to you.
Yeah.
Unlike the school, I'm not aware that they did much of any modification to their capital plan in the initial proposed budget. And I'm not faulting them for it, but there's a distinct difference there.
Right. Yeah. And there's a little confusion on it, even by me, because then they're like, well, you approve that. What? Okay. So it's a little confusing. But yeah, no. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to clarify the library building expansion. It can't be bonded anymore. It needs to be appropriated, is my understanding. So that and they reduce the ask. So that's the primary reason for removing it. Short of we don't have the funds to appropriate it right now, or there hasn't been. It'll be a source of discussion, I think, when we have the full council.
Yeah,
sure. Good point.
And again, just a little clarification too on the turf field, and we know it's something that needs to get done. I think we want to buy a little bit of time. There's been some conversations about, is there some way we could get some type of sponsorship or other types of revenue to help offset that cost. So that's why right now we think that work needs to be done before it comes back in time. Can you talk a little bit, just because the ladder truck it's approved for bonding, the full town council will have to vote for it to actually go to referendum in about the August timeframe?
Yes, the council needs to approve any ballot going to the voters. And so you approve the when and how it goes to the voters. I think the expectation is it'll be in November, but this council will have the decision. It'll be sometime late August, early September as to whether that's the appropriate timing. I have given some more thought to the turf, and I don't mean to complicate this, but essentially it already has existing budget authority in the current budget. It failed to get voter approval last November. So, it's back in front of you, and I think for good reason, so you appreciate that it's still out there and consider it in the context of other needs. But I think, let's just be mindful, in spite of the fact that you may not approve it per se through this budget, I don't think that prior approval lapses. So it's still an issue that is controlled by council when and if it ever goes to the voters. And Councilor Hayes, your point's well taken. I think everyone acknowledges it's destined for a similar outcome unless something materially changes. And at this point, nothing's materially changed.
So Tom, based on what you just said, if something were to materially change during the budget in the coming months, are you suggesting, much like the ladder truck, that would be in the authority of the town council to put it on referendum because we have that pre-existing?
I believe that's the case. Again, something's going to have to change between now and then. But I think if something does, I think the council could approve it, whether it's in November or a future election. Again, that budget authority was granted in FY20. It doesn't lapse. It just lacks voter approval. That's the piece that's holding it back at this point.
Okay, that's good to know. That makes me feel a little bit better. Okay, great.
All right.
Thank you.
So and I'm not saying we should do this, but let's say it's not the turf. Let's say it's a petting zoo that a former council put on in the budget that failed at referendum. And then a new council says, we don't want a petting zoo. It needs to come out. So how would that process work where it's not in the budget anymore? I mean, right now, at least the finance committee is saying, we're not going to carry this through to FY21. So I guess you don't have to answer that now, but I would think that subsequent councils would have some authority over adjusting what previous councils have done.
Perhaps in this instance, you would, if you simply wouldn't advance it to the voters. It would be stymied at that point. But prior councils' decisions in many cases do prevail. I don't know if that's let me think about it further, but I think,
I think that would be good to understand, because we did talk about this in an earlier context this year when a number of things came in front of us that had been approved by former council that, you know, for whatever reason, the projects had not gone forward yet. And, you know, some of them, you know, it was even recommended, let's just dismiss this. It's not, you know, it's not going to happen, you know, so yeah, it would be good to understand that, because not everything gets approved or even funded in the year that it's put into the budget.
Sure, because this requires voter approval, the real control point is the council taking additional action to place it on the ballot to the voters. And if you wish not to advance it, the best way to do that is to simply never put it on the ballot, obviously.
Right. Yeah, for my proverbial petting zoo, but if you know, if it's something different, if it falls under the charter thing, I'd be like to understand it at some point. You don't have to understand it today.
Yep. And of course, the council can always remove budget authority, but that would require additional action of council. So I think we've sufficiently complicated that matter for this morning.
No, I think, yeah. So Tom, I wonder, and it's a question for Betsy and John, before we move, so this includes sort of the municipal side of the equation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Through. Do we want to divide this out and just make our recommendation on the municipal side first, or do you want to go through the rest of it? And I guess I'll defer to John and Betsy on how you want to do this. Seems to me that the municipal side's a little cleaner at this point. We kind of know the numbers, but I'll defer to you whether you want to go through the Board of Education budget at this point and circle back, or try to get clarity on just the municipal side.
You know, I think it probably does make sense to split it out and go ahead and try to close the door on the municipal side now, and then start talking about the schools.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you know, and this may be the appropriate time to bring up that, you know, I am looking to restore some money on the municipal side. And so my proposal is to restore 150,000. And that would be approximately 134 or 35,000 of that would be for our non-union employees to get a 1.5% COLA. They're slated now to get no COLA. And the rest of it would be to restore some of the per diem, the firefighter per diem hours. I think, you know, in the end, it's just a restoration to the budget is my understanding. And if the fire department has full authority to use it how they need it, whether it's per diem, whether it's overtime or whatever it turns out to be. But I am proposing that we restore $150,000 back to the municipal operating budget.
Do you want to do that in the form of a motion, or should we start a motion to approve this and then amend that? How do you want to handle that, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, and Tom, I know this has been, Betsy, it's, you know, thank you for bringing up the issue. I think it's something, at least I understand a lot of town councilors have an interest in that conversation. I think there's been some conversations about whether this will be a recommendation out of the Finance Committee or whether this should be a conversation the night of next week when we actually have the second read. Tom, do you have any insight to share on what your thoughts about the best way to handle that specific issue just raised by Betsy? I think it's a great conversation. We need to have it. It's just.
Sure. Councilor, I very much appreciate the spirit with which this is offered. I too have heard from a number of councilors beyond the Finance Committee members that have expressed a general interest in doing this. I would recommend that you actually bring that as a separate amendment in second reading, simply for the fact that you can kind of isolate the conversation and allow your colleagues to lean into it and to talk about it. If it becomes bundled into a omnibus set of adjustments from the Finance Committee, I fear it might get lost or a little clunky to talk about that particular item. And I think it's worthy of its own conversation and attention. So that would be my recommendation, is by all means, bring that forward, but reserve that and allow your colleagues to have direct commentary on that matter individually.
And I guess I would have to disagree with that, because I think obviously if we're adding money back in, where we landed on June 9th was at a hopeful mill rate of 1.16. So you end up with the question of, to restore this, are we going to adjust that? Or are we going to make adjustments in other places? And presumably, since we're satisfied as a committee, it sounds like, I won't speak for everyone since we haven't voted, but with the general budget that the municipal has presented, then those adjustments are going to come from what we're asking for the school. So if we do it that night, we're going to be faced with the same question. So, I personally feel that it would make sense to restore it here and just explain it to the council, that we restored that and what they can do if they want to remove it. If they want to take it back down to the June 9th number, there could be an amendment to say, remove the 150. I think it's cleaner to do it here and then to have the discussion, on this committee, and whether or not we make a recommendation to increase that, to increase the mill rate estimate, or to go forward with a school number that reflects a reduction of 150 that we're putting back on to the town side. So in my mind, it's cleaner to add it back in here.
Yeah, I didn't appreciate that there was going to be a offsetting adjustment to allow that additional money.
Well, it's a question, right? Do we increase the mill rate or do we make an offsetting adjustment? It's a question, because we haven't finalized that number or the recommendation on that. So that's still the question out there. To me, it can go either way.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, John, do you have any thoughts? What'd be your sort of thoughts on this specific sort of?
For this one, this was not my consensus, but it was a consensus of the council to drive towards the 1.16% mill rate change. So if we're funding an extra 150, as a finance committee, I think we have to do that through cuts. I would be supportive of doing it at the council level and possibly at least having the discussion about doing it through an increase to the mill rate. So I guess I would tend to want to handle it as a council.
Well, I guess, John, the 1.16 did include the additional monies. I don't want to call it for COVID, but that's the way it's been broken out. So the 1.16 did not include that. We did identify, some further cuts on the town side to continue to be where we are. So, we haven't gone through the school side yet and what our recommendations are at this point. And of course, they're just recommendations. The council can do anything, but, I can be the one lone yes vote, I guess, if that's the way it come out, or Peter may vote for me. But, I feel pretty strongly that I want to restore these things for the town employees. So I'd like to see it done now. And then the whole council, I guess, could decide to take it back out. But where we land with the mill rate, I think still remains to be seen as a finance committee before we get to the end of this meeting. So, because we have the school budget that we haven't landed on a final number. We have a presentation in front of us, but we haven't made a final decision. So, to me, it's not a mill rate discussion right now. It's, making the proposal, and I'll make a motion to restore $150,000 to the municipal operating budget. And then, we can vote on that.
I might suggest, Councillor, if you do that, and you intend it to be paid for in some way, it ought to be included in the same motion, because what I heard from Councillor Clucci is that's a critical part of the analysis as to whether you support this or not.
Correct. And I feel like as a finance committee, our job is to come back at a 1.16 now. That was the direction that the council gave us. Unless we can make the case for otherwise, but I think that's kind of how, that's the parameters that we're trying to manage around.
Yeah, but you know, they also, you know, it was also a 4-3 vote on, you know, what was presented on June 9th. You know, so without additional spending. So, yeah, we're doing the hard work. We're identifying more. So I guess, Peter, I would say then, you know, let's go through the school, because it sounds like, and finalize the school and come back to this would be my request then, because it sounds like we want to see where that lands. And then if we're at the 1.16 or if we're not at the 1.16.
Yeah, to be clear, I do support adding it back in. That's it. In case I wasn't clear.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's stay, you know, so I guess the question becomes, I think this is going to be a critical conversation to have. I support adding back in the COLA so that all the town employees are sort of on a level playing field. I think a lot of the other town council members have strong viewpoints as well. I think the chair has sort of suggested he really thinks this should be a rich dialogue that involves all of us. And I think, Tom, is there a way when we do our final recommendations, we can make final recommendations to the full council about the numbers? Can we also include in there a recommendation about specific things that we carve out, have a conversation about?
You can, or you as chair, or any one of you could, you know, could be the one to offer that amendment up, further amendment up, and in doing so, force the conversation with councilors. So, but to answer your question, yeah, it could be, you know, a specific set of adjustments like what we're looking at here, and then maybe some suggestions or advisory pieces, further discussion points.
Betsy, would you be satisfied? I mean, I think it's a great idea. It was your idea. You brought it forward. Would you be comfortable making that motion at the full town council meeting that we have this dialogue? I think it's really important, but I'm a little concerned that there's just 3 of us here. I think this will be a very critical discussion, and the core of this conversation will be less about, is it the right thing to do? Because I think there's consensus that's the fair thing to do. I think the more difficult conversation will be, well, how do we fund it? Is it, as John has suggested, is it a mill rate conversation, or is it an offset somewhere else? So are you comfortable with that, Betsy?
Well, you know, kind of the way I see, you know, things potentially rolling out is, you know, there's restoring the COLA and some of the per diem hours to the fire department. Some dollars to the fire budget. I know they get to use it the way that they see fit. And then the other thing I see is, you know, to John's point, how it's not calculated in the tax calc sheet, but we've not had the conversation about the senior tax credit. So I feel like that conversation really needs to be had. I think we actually owe that to the ordinance committee as well. So I think, I can't remember, but, you know, we were supposed to give them a vote on that at some point. I don't remember. But there's that. And then, you know, the one aspect that, you know, that I'm still considering is whether or not we want to redirect the 179 TIF money that, you know, there's found in TIFs. And I have to say, I don't totally understand what part of that. So I need to do some work with Tom to help me craft that particular motion, but to redirect that, you know, to the general fund just for this year. You know, and then other counselors could have other things that they're looking at. You know, certainly these could be brought forward, you know, as separate motions. It starts to get tricky because then we're going to all be having our calculators out and doing, you know, calculations on the fly. So, I think maybe if at least for me personally, if I'm able to work with Tom to work up what those numbers look like so that can be presented in a clear way to counselors, so that it's not such a big question, and so that the public can take a look at it ahead of time, and what the impact is, then I would be okay with doing it that way. As a fairly new counselor, I look back at past councils and, I see some some meetings that really get rip roaring. So, nobody ever wants that, but I suppose it can go in that direction. But I know we all, as a courtesy, we try to keep them as focused as possible. So if you think that, we can do that in an orderly fashion as best as possible, then, I'm okay with that. I just, I usually agree with many of the things that Councilor Clucci says. In this case, I disagree because we've made a lot of changes since that June 9th. So to say that we wouldn't be coming in at whatever we were told to do from June 9th, I don't think is accurate. June 16th, we had information that was brand new put on our plate at the beginning of the meeting, which was $105,000 bond premium and some other information, and that's the nature of the beast this year. So that's absolutely zero criticism to anybody, but that's kind of the way it's been going. It's been changing, almost on a daily basis. So I'm okay with it as long as we can do it in an orderly fashion. And if John, you and Peter think that we can do that in an orderly fashion, and I'm not open to criticism for not doing it in an orderly fashion, then I'm okay with it.
Let me take a step. So I think there was a lot packed into there. So as specifically as it relates, and I'd be curious where it is just on the issue of, I think there's two that we were talking about particularly. You've got about 150,000 you're requesting that we consider to add back in. I think there's merit to that. I think a lot of the town councils think there's merit. I know there's a lot of agreement on the COLA. I don't know, I haven't had any conversations about the fire per diem. So I think those things can be packed in and handled. And I think if we're willing, we should make a recommendation as a finance committee that is something that should be advanced on the full floor next week. As far as the senior tax credit, I had anticipated we would address the senior tax credit here, at least include it in our recommendations. It certainly can be put on the floor in a motion next week if somebody wants.
Okay.
As far as the TIF, we really haven't had conversations around TIFs, so I don't know how to quite structure that. So let's first just deal, I think the issue at hand, and I think what I'd like to do is deal with the two things we know about, which is the COLA adjustment you're requesting, and I think that has a ton of merit, and I think there's tons of support. It's just how we fund it. And it's the senior tax credit. So John, to answer Betsy's question, are you comfortable bringing to the full council a recommendation that we discuss this COLA adjustment as a full body?
Yeah, so with the senior, sorry, I'll answer your first question first. With the senior property tax relief, I believe we rescheduled second reading to coincide of that ordinance amendment to coincide with the second reading of the budget was my recollection. So I anticipate that's going to be on our agenda anyways.
Yeah, I didn't remember how that was supposed to work, so thank you.
Yeah.
But John, I guess I'm sorry to interrupt. I think what my thought was, I think that's something the finance committee might want to make a recommendation on, just whether it's in or out. But yes, so I think that does need to be discussed that same evening.
Okay. So do you want to talk about senior property tax relief or the COLA first?
Let's talk about how we, Betsy's made a request, a motion that we deal with the COLA here.
Yeah.
Well, it's COLA and a slight increase back to the fire budget.
Yep. So
Betsy, I would be okay actually. So what I'm looking at is our overall operating budgets for the municipality, which is going up about 0.8% where we stand today. And the education is going up 3.1%. So that's the inequity that I'm looking at, and adding something back on, 150 for COLA, I'd want to factor, where do we end up after that?
1.1.
What's that?
1.1. I did the calculation, 1.1%.
So we would go up to 1.1? Okay.
Yeah.
And, all right. So, I mean, that gets us in the right direction. I would support adding it, but there might be some other adjustments that aren't necessarily in the same order of magnitude, I think, to get to equity between the municipal side and the education side. So I don't know that I'm prepared to do all of those. I would support adding the 150 back in, but I think other counselors also want to be able to weigh in on that one.
If I could, I would highly recommend, and hopefully Peter will agree with this, having gone through almost 30 of these through multiple communities, the less moving parts and unknowns going into a budget meeting for your final decision, the better. And I say that just because you can attest, even at the committee level, this stuff is confusing. Add 4 more voices to the conversation that don't have the level of detail that the 3 of you do, it really gets complicated. So my recommendation is to provide them with a clear and concise recommendation from you as a committee, which I think we've got certainly the framework, if not 98% of it right in front of you here. And then undoubtedly there may be additional amendments. I would highly recommend, not just to you 3, but all 7 members of council, be very selective and careful about what additional amendments you bring. It has been the tradition as a courtesy to reduce any amendment you intend to writing, so your colleagues have the courtesy of knowing it's coming. And in this context, it sounds like Councillor Gleistein might be very willing and eager to offer that amendment. That amendment ought to reflect what her intentions are. If it includes a component of how to pay for it, then the amendment ought to indicate that. And then you as a body can consider that on its merits, debate it, discuss it, and vote on it. So the discussion needs to be postured. And the best way to posture it is by way of a fully developed amendment that explains what it is and how it's being paid for. Does that make sense? And I'm pleased to work with whomever wants to offer that amendment, so we prepare it in advance and you can share it out with your colleagues.
Yeah, Peter, I guess I kind of have to disagree with a little bit with that characterization, because we're still in the development of the budget, unfortunately, and so.
No, Councillor, you're not. You are in the 11th hour. Midnight is going to strike. I mean, with all due respect, and right. I guess you're not appreciating my experience and my advice here, but this can get ugly quickly and very confusing, and I'm trying to protect you from that.
Well, our meeting isn't over today, so we haven't looked at everything yet, but I think my proposal at this point is pretty simple, which is to restore $150,000 to the municipal operating budget. I think that's pretty simple. That's all I'm proposing at this point. I haven't made any kind of proposals on the rest of what we're going to look at today. So the same way I might have said, I want to propose a cut to this, or I want to take this out of capital, I'm proposing to restore $150,000 back to this.
If there's a second, and my simple point is, if there's a second half to it, I think you should, for full disclosure and for honest debate and discussion and informed voting, that ought to be part of the proposal, not just half of it.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. Why don't we move on and talk about the other half? I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, here's part of my concern, I guess, and to kind of, we're an hour in, we need to be able to walk away today with something we're going to send to the town council. I suspect this conversation about, I think adding in is the easy part of the equation. The really difficult part of the equation is it an increase to the mill rate, or is it an offset somewhere else? And I think instead of having it in 2 places, I think that's going to be something that we should wait. So my recommendation is that we recommend that this is a motion that's considered the night of the second read. we can table that particular thing to the end of this meeting. What I'd like to be able to do at this point is try to, I think we're close to be able to agree, other than that one item where we are in the municipal budget. I just like to get that one landed. So I think the only thing that remains to be discussed on the municipal budget is, do we want to, right now, the senior tax credit, at least as this has been developed and flowed, the increase is not reflected in these numbers. If these are going to be our recommended numbers, it won't have the senior tax credit in it, the increase in the senior tax credit. If we're okay with that, and I guess my proposal will be, I think, and has already been pointed out by Councilor Kluge, is that that's also going to be in our agenda item the 24th to talk about that. So those would be two items that I think it'd be more efficient to have the full council weigh in on and try to get to some consensus. So with that, and what we've been through on the municipal side, and Betsy, I know where we are. We'll table just for a second with a caveat about we'll circle back to adding back the COLA. But in general, are you guys okay with the town budget as it exists, except for those two items that we just flagged?
Yeah, except for those two items. And with the senior property tax credit, it was approved at first reading, but I suspect Tom feels there's a consensus of the council to not fund the increase. So it's not in the budget right now.
Larissa, if you can just scroll to the last page, just of this display, just so you can see how it's postured. There you go, stop right there. So again, the budget currently sits at 263, which includes the additional 58,000. And the numbers that I'm presenting to you here remove that expansion of 58,000.
Right.
So are you looking to vote as a finance committee whether we support that reduction, or just allow the council to vote when they take the matter up next week?
I guess what I'm testing both Betsy, both of you, is to say, are you okay with these numbers as presented today for the town municipal budget, which at this point would not include that increase in the senior tax credit, with the understanding that that is going to be something we're going to have to talk about as a full council at the second read. So it's not, we're recommending to accept these numbers for now. If we want to add it back, and if we want to add back COLA, those are two things that are going to have an impact on funding in some manner. So we're going to have to deal with it as a full body. Does that answer your question, John, or did I confuse you?
Well, it's confusing. I was just trying to think through the sequence. So we may have an on-the-fly change to the budget order based on the vote on the resident property tax relief.
My hope would,
we might for the COLA as well. So
what is your sage advice on how do you navigate us through these?
Yeah, my hope would be that, and it's customary, that Peter would be recognized as chair of finance to offer up this, whatever amendment set of adjustments you come to today. The council consider that as the first amendment, and in most cases they adopt that as kind of a starting point. That gets you almost to the end. Then if there are issues you want to go back to or modify further amendments are then in order. And that's what I was referring to. We could prepare amendments for both those items, and councilors could offer them up to make sure that there's specific discussion around those items. But
I think that's reasonable.
It's cleanest if the full council will adopt your recommendation as proposed and then work from there. That gets you 99% there or something like that.
Yeah, and when this was presented to the full council where the consensus was to hit the 1.16, this was already removed from the figure at that time as well, I believe.
I believe you're correct, yes.
So I think that's reasonable, Peter.
Yeah, I think on that, because that was already in the 1.16 discussion, that's good.
So can we have a motion to accept the municipal budget as presented today, with the understanding that there's probably going to be those two amendments that Tom is referencing, that any counselor can work with Tom in the intervening period of time to get it fleshed out?
Well,
I'll motion to accept the municipal adjustments as presented by the town manager.
You know, I thought just a second ago, we said we were going to finish off because I think people have rightly asked, you know, where I'm thinking I would pay for the 150. And it's clearly, you know, it's not a mystery here. It's going to come from the school side in what I'm proposing. So I think it might be of help to take a look at that.
Yeah, Betsy, I think what we're trying to do is, we know there's those two outstanding issues. I think that will be the heart of the conversation if there's a motion introduced. And I think the motion, I think Tom was pretty clear about the motion that needs to be introduced is, you know, how much money, and how it's either going to be, you know, operational budget increase, or it's going to be offset by revenue somewhere else or expenses somewhere else. So I know you want to get, but what I'm trying to do is we're an hour in, I'm trying to move through this. So Tom's trying to get out the documents today, right, Tom?
Yes. Yes.
So I offered a motion, but there hasn't been a second. Yeah.
I'll second the motion. And I guess just Colette, maybe take a roll call on the motion, which is
Yes, roll call on the motion. Counselor Hayes,
yes.
Counselor Glystein,
No.
Counselor Clucci,
Yes.
Okay, so that and Betsy, I think there's tremendous support for what you're suggesting. I just think if you can work with Tom on that, and we will have that conversation the night of the second read. I think
We probably were going to have the conversation anyway. You know, where I'm differing with you guys is what makes it smoother. I hear what Tom is saying, you know, and I do highly respect his opinion. I think this is going to have the opposite effect. I think it's going to make it worse. So I'm just, you know, looking at this from my personal standpoint of, I think a recommendation coming from this council, if everyone agreed to it, to have the 150 in there, then there would be discussions, you know, further about what, you know, the final school budget and what the final mill rate is and all that, you know, and they could, you know, they could also take our recommendation and say, no, we don't want to put the 150 in. So, you know, my no vote is because I personally think putting the 150 back in, if the two counselors that are in the finance committee are for that, is cleaner, because what we're doing is we're making our recommendation. So, you know, we're saying this is our recommendation. Both of you have said you're for the 150, I think. I think John did. And so to me, that's our recommendation. So, you know, put it back in. It's one line item for Tom. You know, it's increasing the municipal bottom line to, you know, top line by 150, you know. So anyway, that's why I voted no, because I think it's cleaner to put the way that I proposed it today, but you know, people disagree.
No, we hear you. Okay, Tom, so maybe work us through now but Tom?
Yeah, okay. Larissa, go back up. You know, just to recap, go back to the second page, I guess. Second page. There you go. So just to recap on the education operating budget, that's the reduction of $70,650. Again, I think Ruth's explained why that number is slightly different, but that was a number identified by the school board finance committee itself, and we've just carried that forward. And again, we've made a further adjustment that they directed for adult ed, that 3630. So fairly small changes on the school operating side and adult ed. So now if we can turn to school capital, which was the subject of a lot of discussion earlier this week. Go ahead to the next one, right there. So the top portion is what we just dealt with, municipal capital. The bottom portion is school capital. My recommendation included a series, you know, accepting some school board directed changes on capital to be appropriated, capital projects to be appropriated. Those total 67,100. And then I kind of rounded that number up to 150 in terms of total reduction of appropriated capital items. And beyond that, there was also a switch from an appropriated item. This is the municipal school technology refresh, to switch it from appropriations to bond. And then finally, again, from the school's finance committee, they proposed removing, if you will, $757,000 in capital projects to be bonded. And if it pleases you, we do have a detail that goes, reflects these details. Keep going.
Yeah.
Next one. So the format will be somewhat familiar to you, although we did sort things by appropriation and bonding before they were kind of blended. And I don't know about you, but that was confusing to me. So what you're looking at here reflects the actual changes that are shown in aggregate on that cover page we just reviewed. So the far right-hand column shows the current status. And I will just point out for your benefit, Larissa, do you see 31,900 and 50,000 on the town council first reading column? They're near the bottom. On appropriations, right there. Those two items, I may be accused of being too specific on the school budget side, but those are the things you'll see I've zeroed out that that roughly total that extra $82,000 or so.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I thought the Board of Education would have accepted those last night. To my surprise, they did not. So I don't know how specific we want to be in terms of which projects stay in and which go out. But it's certainly you have control over the bottom line, and that bottom line does reflect, that total reduction of essentially it's 149 rather than 150 from appropriated items. And then down below on bonded items, that reflects the school board's directive of removing 757. That's in those three projects, the 250, the 392, and then reduction of one bus. The combination of those three items is 757. And then the highlighted one is the one that you've switched to bond, 150.
Yeah. Just a question on I thought the STEM lab, it's the 392, plus there was 250 for the garage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought there was a number for the furnishings of the STEM lab. Is that in the 757? I thought there was a separate line item for the furnishings for the STEM lab, but if we're taking the STEM lab out, the furnishings should go with it.
I can't answer that necessarily, other than that these descriptions and these capital projects is what we got from the school. We didn't create them or recharacterize them.
Yeah.
So I think it may have been wrapped into that number, Peter, not a separate line.
Okay. So the only question I have and I've really struggled with it, and I think it should be a conversation. So maybe you can take us through a little bit, the tech refresh, which are for laptop computers mostly.
I think it's a bit more than that. There may be some network systems and modems and such, but it's all fairly durable goods. Items that don't have tremendous longevity per se, probably 3 to 5 years in most cases in terms of the useful life.
Yeah. And we've tried to have a policy for items like that, instead of being bonded and we borrow money for it, are more routine. We have these expenses every year. We had tried to, the finance committee in the past has worked on what do we appropriate, what do we bond. We're trying to have guidelines. We had originally started off with this being in appropriations.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we think it probably is where it should be. We have moved it over to bonding. I just want to come back and readdress that. I think I'm more comfortable with that remaining in appropriations rather than bonding. So I will defer to my colleagues on what their thoughts are. That does have an impact on operational budgets. So John and Betsy, I'd just be curious about, is that more an appropriated item, or is that more of something that we should bond?
So from my perspective, I think it's something that should be appropriated because it's a short-term thing. So, you know, I don't know the exact lifespan of our computers, probably 3 to 5 years. So I think it makes sense to appropriate something like that. In terms of the impact though, I think from the school's perspective, they just care that it's funded, right? That they have the authority to spend the money, whether it's appropriations or bonding. I don't know that it really makes a difference to them, but if we do shift it to appropriations, it would have a bottom line impact.
Right.
Just to be clear, though it would be financed, we would not finance it more than 3 years in recognition of what it is and its longevity. If that helps and helps the conversation.
Also, if I could interject quickly, the reason they wanted to swap it over from appropriation to bond was because they anticipate receiving some monies from the state, but they just don't know how much. And because they don't know how much, and they won't know until January. So I think that's why they wanted to put it towards the bond, because then some of it could be funded from the state's revenues and some could be funded from the bonds as needed.
But
that makes
wouldn't
a
we
lot of
get the revenues? It should be the state should be indifferent whether it's appropriated or bonded, wouldn't
Well,
it?
no, the state won't care, but in terms of, we don't know how much to anticipate for our revenue.
So Peter, the difference is we'd be raising money that we may not need.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think that, you know, I'm definitely not for bonding it. And, you know, I realize it might be a scramble to, you know, and this isn't the only tech refresh. This is just middle school tech refresh. So I believe there's the town funds tech refresh for a big portion. Oh, they fund, we get a little bit back from the state for tech based on state mandates, but then I don't have the number in front of me, but I know someone mentioned at least 150 for the high school. So there is money in, I don't know the total number for tech refresh. It might take some creativity, and then, you know, hopefully people will contact their state reps and we will get the money that we're, you know, anticipating. So you know, to me, there's so many unknowns, you know, for what's going to happen next year. And this is just one more unknown. As far as I understand it, the middle school is the only mandate. So, you know, there might be some technical reports that could be run. You know, I know, you know, where I work, they do them all the time. You know, what devices are actually active, which ones are not active. You know, there may be kids who use their own laptop a lot more. And so, you know, maybe there can be a new policy, you know, where you can opt out for a year or something if you want to, with a pool of spares or something like that. So yeah, you know, I'm not for putting it in appropriations or bonding. I don't think it was in there. I think this was added towards the end, was my understanding. Wasn't this added after June 9th? Is that correct?
No, I believe it's been a capital project since the proposed budget.
Okay.
The only change,
Under appropriation.
it was appropriated. It was
Okay,
an
gotcha.
appropriated item, and it wasn't until this week that
Which was bonding. Okay.
Tom suggested that we could move it from appropriations to bonding. So I think if I heard it right, and maybe we, you know, I think John thinks it's more appropriate being in appropriations. I think it's more appropriate being in appropriations.
I'm backtracking.
Oh, you're backtracking. Okay.
Yeah, Ruth changed my mind, and I'll try to explain it, I guess, a different way. So if we appropriate this money, we're going to charge the taxpayers for it this year, right now. And given that there's the potential to collect money from the state, we don't necessarily need to do that. If we just tag it as bonded, then they have the authority to spend that money. And if we need to raise the funds that to make up for the gap that doesn't come from the state, we could bond it. So it makes a lot of sense to me now. I wasn't seeing that nuance, I guess, before Ruth explained it. So I do support keeping it as a bonded item right now.
Then why wouldn't we do that every year? Because I'm assuming that's kind of the case every year, right? You don't know exactly till a certain point when you're going to get the money.
We would have to invite someone in from the school side. I'm not familiar that there's any consistent state money to support technology. This is something unique, I think. It's not a consistent
Kate is on
program.
the call if we want to get.
I think Kate Bolton could certainly answer that question quickly.
Yeah, John, before we get to it, but John, I mean, there's two ways. We don't necessarily have to collect the money from taxpayers. If it's back in appropriations, then it's back in their operational budget and they can find ways to.
It's still in the capital budget, Peter. It's
still in the capital budget, but the capital budget, if it's an appropriated item, goes down into the net request from the taxpayer. So, I mean, what it would in effect do if we hold the line, whatever the net request is right now as presented this week, it would reduce the net request from taxpayers if we held the line. So that's where you're right. If we pass it all on, we're raising money. Other alternative is you make it budget neutral.
Yeah, I think we would need a separate action to reduce the operating budget for the schools by an equal amount or an offsetting amount, if you wanted it to be tax neutral.
Right, but I was just suggesting that could be a mechanism. So I'm just more focused on this will be an issue always going forward, that the finance committee had tried to say all these tech refreshes should be just ongoing operational expenses of the school because we know we have them, rather than keep borrowing money for them and bonding them. It belongs in the, yes, it's a capital budget, but it should be funded every year from operations. Was where the finance committee, and Tom, you've got the history of those conversations. That's where we were trying to go with a lot of these things. It's just last year we ended up, and we got killed for it. We ended up moving a whole bunch of stuff from appropriations to bonding to be able to get to the numbers.
We have a longstanding aspiration in that regard. I'm afraid we don't have a terribly good track record of actually converting that to that system.
Following our policy, I know.
Right.
So I guess on this item, so I guess just, maybe it sounds like, Betsy, where are you on it? Yes, no, bonded or appropriated?
Well, I guess I have a question, and it kind of goes to what you're saying, what John is saying. So because this is considered, it's on this screen. So the school tells us what they want, and then we make the final decisions on this screen, everything on this screen, or just the bottom part of this screen?
Depends who you ask. Certainly you have bottom line authority.
Capital.
I mean,
I'm sorry, Tom. So yes, sorry.
I mean, certainly the council has bottom line authority. It's questionable or arguable as to whether on the capital side, you actually have authority to kind of line item things. Historically, we haven't seen the need to dive that deep. This year we are, for whatever reason.
Yeah, so I guess I would see it removed from the bonded, so 51544,197, and not added back in to the 319,015. That's where I would be.
The only thing I would say is just generally about this need, to the councilor's point earlier, we don't know what the future holds. Distance learning may well be a critical component again in the fall, at least in some capacity. So having adequate technology strikes me as a pretty important feature. So one way or another,
I totally agree with you, Tom. I think you just said that we need to focus on the bottom line of each category. So I'm not gonna weigh in on, I probably went beyond what I even should have for saying, we are looking at individual line items, but so for bottom line, I guess, if something else, like there's an HVAC repair that's 150, I'm sure it's needed. So I'm not even looking at that, but I'm using that as a number because there's another 150 in there. So I guess at this point, I'm proposing to, reduce the line that we're seeing at the bottom, the 1544197 by 150.
okay.
Well,
That's what you're proposing, Peter?
no, I mean, I guess where I am, and it isn't a line item that I'm talking about. and I think to get to the heart of your question, the Board of Education comes up for their capital request. Whether it's appropriated or bonded is something that, what, Tom, your team determines as you go through the capital projects?
Yeah, Ruth does.
So I mean, we have a policy in place, so they're not saying that's not an appropriate line item. They're just saying by policy, to be consistent across the town, this is normally an appropriated item or a bonded item. And so at this point, the only issue I was raising is it has carried in the budget to this date as an appropriated item. Tom put on the table the possibility of moving it to a bonded item. So I'm not questioning whether we need the laptops or we should be doing the laptops. I'm just questioning, is it an appropriated item or a bonded item? And then that has consequences, as we've discussed. I understand the rationale about there can be funding for it, but like everything else, like the 400,000 that they have in surplus, if in the COVID, we're going to get money for COVID. No one knows how much money we're going to get for COVID. And what we're just making the assumption that if we get some money for COVID, that will help to go offset those expenses, that should generate, if it covers costs, that should generate a surplus the Board of Education is going to have available next year that they're going to be able to use to supplement their budget. Just like if they get funding for these laptops, it doesn't matter if it's appropriated or bonded. If they do get funding, that's going to be money that becomes available that will go into surplus. And they are concerned. We've carried much higher surpluses in the past. And Tom, that surplus now is locked and loaded at 400, we think. I mean, they've tapped into almost all of their surplus, right?
The school?
Yeah.
To my knowledge, there's something in the order of 400 still not
Right.
utilized in the FY21 budget.
Right, but they've carried higher reserves in the past, right? Anyway.
I don't have a budget warrant in front of me, Peter, so I think we're saying the same thing. So that the next to the bottom line, I mean, is it going to come across as on the budget warrant, it doesn't break it out as appropriation or capital. So you're saying on the bottom line, you want to keep the appropriation, at least to the discussion so far, of 1863212. And that's the way it's going to appear on the budget warrant.
I don't know. I don't know about the budget. All I'm suggesting, it's not going to change the bottom line of the total finance committee recommendations for capital. It doesn't change what we're recommending that they do for capital.
Right. It would change the mill rate though.
Unless we take some other action. Yes.
Correct.
And that is the issue. We've got two choices. We either say, this isn't about, at this point, it's not about the mill rate. It's about, is it an appropriate item to be bonded, or is it an appropriate item to be appropriated by our policy? And if it should be appropriated, then that's the way it should be. Then we can have a conversation. Does the bottom line net request increase by the 150? Or do we say they need to find that somewhere else in their budget?
Okay, gotcha.
And I'm kind of in the court of saying it should be appropriated. And I would recommend that they find it somewhere else in their budget if they need to do it. I think there's still things in appropriated capital that could be, they've got choices to make about where they want to spend their appropriated capital dollars.
Yeah, I don't know if that's a motion. It's probably not at this point, but.
Well, then that's if you make that motion, and then we'll see where it goes.
So, I mean, this was appropriated until the 16th. I just want to make sure I understand that, right?
It's always been appropriated. We didn't take any action.
Tom moved it, so.
Correct.
We didn't take any action, so it's still.
Yeah, to reject the town manager's recommendation that we bond the middle school focused tech refresh.
Say that again. So
I make a motion that we reject the town manager's recommendation to bond the middle school focused tech refresh.
and it's appropriate, just, okay.
It would go back to appropriations and
Go back to appropriations.
It was before, yeah.
Do you want to add to the second part of that, how are we going to address whether it's a mill rate impact or not?
Well, I think we still haven't, we're gonna have that conversation after this. So should we just have that conversation now and then, you know,
Well, we can, certainly, we can do that. So maybe we just stick with the motion that you made. I'll second the motion.
okay.
Colette, what do you think? I mean, as far as you have to take a roll call, right?
Yes, I do. Okay, Counselor Hayes,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci.
No.
Excuse me, John.
No, sorry.
Okay, Counselor Glystein.
Yes.
Motion passed.
So what that will do is it will reduce the 1544197 by 150 and increase the 3190515 by 150.
Yep.
Okay. Just so you appreciate, it also has an effect on capital revenues by a similar amount. You know, in terms of how I've presented it here, we've carried in as a bonded item the revenue to offset. It comes from bonds. Don't concern yourself with it, but it's going to have a similar effect, downward effect on capital revenue for school.
Yeah, but it's just, I mean, at the end of the day, the net tax request, it just all washes out, right? For the most part.
Not unless you do a separate action.
Right, unless you find a way to pay for it. Otherwise,
Well, right, but we're going to have that conversation
okay.
next or at the end of the school. So does that take care of all the adjustments on the school?
I believe so, yes.
So I guess then that comes, the second part of the question is how do we fund the new appropriate or putting it back into appropriations? You know, I think I'm of the court that it doesn't increase the mill rate. That needs to come from some other operational or capital line in the Board of Education's budget. I don't know where you are, Betsy and John, but that's where I would be.
Larissa, can you just scroll back up to page 2? There you go, stop right there. Yes. So Peter, what I think I hear you saying is that, or what I guess I would suggest for simplicity is to modify the number, the top right number, 52,997,423. That's the total of the operating budget for education. What I think your motion or your suggestion would be to reduce that by 150.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess that wouldn't quite be my recommendation. I would still reduce the total capital by 100,000.
How does 100 work into your, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, so we're at 1.8 63212, and that puts us at a so if we reduced, that's a 82% increase over what was requested last year. If we were to reduce the capital request by, I'm sorry, the calculation I did was to reduce it by by 100. That'll be a 25% increase over FY20. So, I mean, as you said, I think we only focus on the bottom line. I kind of have maybe ideas where I would focus, but I think a 25% increase, that would be an 82% increase in, I should say in the top line. it sort of gets mixed up here with appropriation, but I guess that I would, I think we have to talk appropriation now because we're talking mill rate, but I would propose that it be reduced by 100,000. And I'm sorry, I haven't said this very well at all, but the appropriation 219,015 would represent a 25% increase over FY20.
There is a motion. It lacks a second at this point. So I want to make sure we're not adding a secondary motion. Is there a second to Peter's original motion?
What was the motion? I'm sorry.
It's to reduce the school operating budget by $150,000.
Oh. Yeah, I guess yeah, I'll second the motion so we can.
Okay, thank you. So now it's worthy of discussion.
Right, yeah, sorry about that.
So I've kind of weighed in. John and Betsy, any discussion?
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is just an offset to the bond versus appropriate. So I'm still in the camp that it was better off being bonded for this particular situation.
Okay, but I think the process is our recommendation, at least. I mean, this doesn't mean, again, this will be discussed by the full council, but I think we already had the motion and it was accepted to move it from bonding to appropriation. So I think that's been sort of done. Now we're having the motion that's now on the floor. And I think, John, it comes down to, do you increase the operational budget by 150,000 or do you reduce it? And the motion is to reduce it. I suspect what you might be saying is you'd be in the position that you would increase the operational budget.
No, I wouldn't touch the operational budget. I would take it in the capital. So I guess with this motion, I'm a no as well, as if that wasn't clear.
Yeah, and I think, what I'm proposing is that the operational budget be decreased by 50,000. You've proposed 150,000. If we decrease it by 50,000, that gets us to about a little less than a 3% increase in the education gross budget, not including the pandemic costs. So that gets us close to about 3%. So I'm not making a new motion here, but I'm explaining why, and what I might propose in a next motion would be to reduce the operating budget by 50,000 and reduce the capital budget by 100,000. So I think the first motion was to take it out of bonding, and the second motion, and I think the way I understood you were saying, Peter, it all comes out the same on the bottom line with the mill rate. But I guess my question back to you is, do we need to definitely say that, reduce the operating budget by that, or can we say we want to reduce the operating by 50 and the capital by 100, and we're still at the 1.16?
I think Tom, maybe you can. I think what we're trying, the motion on the table is to say the net request that we're going to fund through the taxpayer and the mill rate on the school side gets reduced now by the 150,000 that we have moved from bonding back to appropriations.
But Peter, more specifically, your motion had this top right-hand number, 52,997,423, being reduced by 150 to offset that additional expense in capital now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I would suggest you call the vote on that just so we can understand where things are, and if there's a subsequent motion to come forward, by all means.
Yeah. So I guess that Colette,
Certainly.
maybe
Councilor Hayes.
Can I make an amendment to the motion?
I might suggest it's cleaner if you just let this be defeated and offer your own clean one.
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion.
well, I think what Tom's saying, then vote no on this one, and then you can offer your amendment.
right, but I do have a right to offer the amendment, right?
You do, yes.
Yeah.
Trying to help.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's
so if
finish,
you-
let's finish with the vote on the motion on the table, please. And I would say Counselor Hayes,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci,
No.
I'd like to make an
Counselor
amendment.
Glystein.
I'd like to make an amendment to the motion on the table.
Wait, Betsy, I think what we're saying is if you vote,
I understand what's being said. I think Colette and Tom called for the vote. I mean, if you're
Yeah.
calling for the vote, Peter, then you can call for the vote, but I guess I'm not understanding. I asked to make an amendment. to the
I
motion.
know, Betsy, I think what we're trying to say procedurally, if you don't want this motion, John's voted no. If you vote no, you then can propose an amendment that you want, a motion that you want us to consider. So we're not saying you can't, we're just saying you need to kill this that's on the table and then bring forth what you want us to consider.
Right,
We're not trying to shut you down, we're just trying to say,
I fully understand that.
okay,
I just want to be clear. I fully understand that. I don't want to lose the intent of this motion. That's why I was offering to amend it. I don't want to lose the intent of this motion. So the amendment was important to me, not just to vote this down and then bring my own amendment, but I'll vote yes for this then. And then I'll bring another motion.
No, Betsy, I think procedurally, if you vote yes, and I vote yes, then this stands. If you vote no, you could come back with your
I'm voting.
motion
I'm
and we
voting
can
yes.
have.
Colette, I believe I heard Counselor Glystein voting yes. So
Thank you. The motion passes.
Okay,
Do you
so
ever propose a motion?
okay, propose motion.
I'd like to propose a motion to reduce the school capital budget by $50,000.
That
So this is where sorry, not to interrupt the motion, but with the capital programs, I believe they do need to be line itemed because that's how they're tracked and funded. They're not necessarily funded in one particular year. I think you need to be specific. Am I misinterpreting that, Tom or Ruth?
I think that level of clarity would be helpful for all involved, yes.
Okay, sure. I have to get to that page.
Larissa, it'd probably be helpful
I'd
to
like
go.
to reduce the laptop appropriation for refresh of middle school laptops by $50,000.
okay, I'll second it for conversation or discussion.
Yeah, so where I'm at is, I wasn't comfortable taking it out of, all the 150 out of the operating budget, but, not being able to amend that, I also wasn't comfortable with getting to a point where, maybe nothing would be reduced because I do feel that we need to account for this somehow. So, this is more in line with where I think, it would be appropriate for spending to go.
So let me just try to bring some clarity. So we have sort of worked through the process by which the tech refresh will be appropriated, not bonded. And you're suggesting that you want that number now to go from 150 to 100, right?
Correct. Based on what Councillor Clucci is saying, in the end, the town council needs to line item all the items here. I kind of understood that we were focused on the bottom line, so I apologize for that. I thought I was, told focus on the bottom line here, but I'm happy to say, what I think should and shouldn't be funded and how it should and shouldn't be funded. I have, plan to bring forth an increase of $150,000 to the town council that it sounds like a lot of town councilors are inclined to, at least consider for restoring the COLAs and some firefighter funding on the town side. And so, this still leaves 100,000 gap for that. But by reducing a little bit more out of the capital appropriation to the school, we're getting closer on that.
John, so it's been seconded. It's open for discussion. Any thoughts?
I don't know how much the middle school tech refresh is going to cost. To me, the 150 is the best estimate that I have. I assume that there's some diligence that went into that number. So I guess I don't support arbitrarily cutting it. And I don't fully appreciate what the impact would be, because they're still going to have, well, I guess the impact would be you're going to reduce the capital program by 50,000.
Which we were told originally it was bottom line, but it's getting to be confusing where the authority is here, but.
It's only bottom line if it's appropriated. But from the school's perspective, I don't know that it doesn't matter to them whether it's appropriated or bonded.
Well, this is appropriated, right? The middle.
It is now, yeah.
Yeah, so really my original motion was to reduce the appropriation line by 150. I've now said 50 since we already did some reductions on the operating. So that's where it's at. If they don't want to do it in the laptop program, it might come out of somewhere else there. It sounds like you're saying it doesn't have to be, we still won't have authority over the top, lines. So.
Can I ask a question of Ruth? If I misinterpreted it, once the capital budget is approved, they can't shift things from one project to another, right? They have to manage what was approved?
If you do it by the line item, yes, I think that's correct. But if you just say we're going to, just like we do with the school's operating budget, if you were to say we want to reduce it and leave that decision to the school board, that may be better for them, because they may need that full 100. How do you say, sorry, you get a laptop, but you don't because we only had 100,000, not the 150. So that was the only thing I would say.
And we would need a new capital plan by the time we do second reading, right?
Say that again.
We would need a final capital plan by the time we do our second reading. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yes.
I just see the IT director chimed in. He said the MLTI tech refresh of the middle school for FY21 will cost $300,000.
No, I think that was for total, right? They already have 150 in for the school, for the high school.
Yes, there is 150 in operating funds, and this is the extra 150 through CIP.
MLTI, what does that stand for?
Something laptop initiative.
Is that for all laptops or just the middle school? Oh, so 300 is for SMS only. Okay, gotcha. All right. Well, so I'm not focused on the laptops, and I wasn't, and I think Ruth just said, it's a bottom line. So I go back to what I proposed, which is a motion to reduce the capital budget by $50,000, and how that works out between now and the end, I don't know.
Well, your motion could simply be changing this 319015 is now plus 150. It'd be reducing that number by 50,000.
Right, and you already reduced it for them, I guess, even though they didn't approve it by the 50 and the 80, right? We put that in. We took the 50 and the 80 out. You did in your suggestions, right? For the playground maintenance and the paving.
And I did that out of convenience. The numbers work, but I don't have an opinion as to what's more important than another. I would suggest you size the total amount of appropriation and let them allocate it as they see fit.
Exactly. And that's what I was trying to do. We just got hung up on the laptop conversation because I think, John said, well, I needed to specify, but we already specified because they didn't take out the paving. They didn't take out the playgrounds. You took the paving and the playgrounds out. And so my motion is to reduce that number by 50,000.
Okay. So not a specific line item. That is consistent with the way Tom has got these others positioned. It's just a reduction in the capital appropriated budget. They're going to determine where he is. Presumably we'll have a schedule that we'll be able to look at and be part of the packet for the second read. Is that what we're saying, Tom? Is how this would be structured?
Frankly, the budget order itself, is simply affecting the aggregate numbers. It does not concern itself with the details. So unless you want that level of detail, and I might suggest that would be a complicating factor.
Okay, so yours is always intended, when you put this 150,000 in, it was a global number, and they will rearrange their capital appropriated items to however they see fit to hit the number, is what you're really saying.
Accordingly, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So with that, I think, Colette, are you ready to take a vote on Betsy's motion?
Yes, let's vote on the motion. Counselor Hayes,
Yes.
Counselor Clucci,
No.
Counselor Glystein,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay.
Is it typical for us to split a single project between operational and capital budgets?
John, I think how we got there is it goes back to, we at one point, when we had the Joint Finance Committee, said we need to move toward all of these going to appropriations going forward. And then because it's such a large number, then the conversation became, we can't do that all at once. So then we kind of have this hybrid, we'll move toward it by putting 50% toward operational, 50% toward capital. I think, Tom, isn't that how we kind of got to that, splitting it between operational and capital?
Yeah, I think it's the school's valiant attempt at really trying to carry these year-over-year expected costs in their operating budget. Again, they have a similar goal to us to convert those sorts of expenses that recur or reoccurring and get them over into the operating budget. It's at the expense of tax rate, and so try as we might, we seem unsuccessful.
Okay, so then I think, Tom, that navigates us, is as clear as mud for you on how this goes together, or do you think?
No, I think we've tracked it.
Okay.
Yep.
So again, for this group, for the Finance Committee, all we're going to be doing is, these are our recommendations for the full town council for their consideration. My experience in the past has been each counselor then can bring forth anything they want to adjust. And Tom, usually there's maybe a couple amendments potentially that come forth in that process.
Yeah, there's no limit, but I do encourage you to be very careful about what you bring forward. Just in the course of a public meeting, it gets cumbersome in terms of parliamentary procedure and making sure everyone understands what's being proposed and what the impact of that is. So please be careful of what you bring forward, but there's no limit to that either.
So I think the items based on our conversation as a Finance Committee, and I think as we summarize this out, I think we do need to note where we weren't unanimous on something and where there was differences of opinions. I think that's really important. I think where we are as potential items, it sounds like that might come forward, Tom, will be there needs to be a conversation, as we have had, about do we want to do something on the COLA side? And as Betsy has said, the per diem hours, for now, that's just a placeholder for the terminology. We're going to talk about the senior tax credit and just confirm that it's either in or out of the budget. And then I think on some of the things we just have talked about, will be the conversation, is it an increase to the mill rate or the total taxpayer ask? or is it not on some of the items that you considered? Is that a
I
fair?
think what you've done today actually decreases the ask to the taxpayer by 50,000.
Yeah.
So to your point, Peter, the minutes will, I'm sure Colette will do a bang up job, will reflect the discussion and certainly record your votes so your colleagues can see how the committee dealt with these issues. But the prevailing votes will be incorporated into a single amendment, not unlike what we have here, that will be going to the council. I presume they'll accept that as the first motion offered.
Yeah.
And more than likely will accept it. And then there are subsequent amendments that may be offered. And Councillor Gleistein, I'm pleased to work with you to prepare the one that you have articulated today. And it sounds as though that will not be a tremendous surprise to folks and hopefully garner support.
Right. So yes, and I would like to make a request here. I can also put it in writing, but I'd like a breakdown of that TIF number, the 179.9, what that involves, so I could understand if I want to bring a motion forward to readjust some of that TIF revenue that is held in different accounts and doesn't apply to the general fund. So if I could have a breakdown of that, as well as if there are existing TIF funds that have monies in them, these are potentially expected money. So let's say one TIF has 5,000 in it and we're expecting another 100,000 in it. So that we could see, what that looks like.
Councilor, I'd ask you to reduce that request to writing. I will do our level best. It is now noon on Friday. Our meeting, we need to get materials out the door today. So
That's fine. I don't need it today. I just need it, so that I could get it out to people before the meeting.
understood. Understood. I'm just saying my focus today is going to be able to
Right.
really package up what the committee has done. So
Yes,
the
that
agenda
is
is
definitely
complete.
the most important focus, but
Yep.
I need the breakdown on that so that I can bring that TIF amendment forward for the line item that's the TIF, because really we haven't discussed, we brought it up, but it hasn't been discussed much because it's kind of a line item in the, at the bottom of the mill rate.
Please send an email just so I'm sure that I understand what your needs are. We'll do our best to respond.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So before we open this up to public comment, Tom, do you have, it sounds like you think you have what you need to be able to produce the documents you need for our discussion at the second read.
I say that, but I'm looking directly at Ruth. I feel as though I've tracked things. I think, Ruth, please speak up if there's any question.
I think we have, I've got the 3 items. One is to change the school CIP from bonding to appropriated on the 150, to reduce the school's operation budget by 150, and then to reduce the school's capital by 50,000. And we're allowing them to make that decision on where they want to make that adjustment.
In a nutshell, that's the product of the meeting today. Yes.
And then we didn't really decide on anything with the senior property tax relief, correct? So that's still going to stay, we're showing it.
Well, I think by virtue of, if you accept my recommendation, it's being removed. The funding's being removed.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, we had decided that we'd bring it as it's presented.
Okay. Thank you.
So everybody, John, I know you're not, this will be, again, these are only our recommendations in order for us to kind of, as a starting point on the second read. I don't know how the other counselors will weigh in. I think these are all rich conversations. So I think that's, and it looks like we got a bunch of questions.
You do. You have 3 people with their hands up. The first one is Councillor Hamel. He raised his hand, just in order of hands that I saw being raised. He was first.
He waited? I didn't see your hand, Don. I apologize.
Well, I raised my hand so long ago in the meeting that I've lost track of the question. So it was either been answered or I've completely lost it. So yeah, I'm okay. Thank you.
My apologies. I wasn't paying as much attention as I should have. My apologies.
It wasn't that important anyway, but thank you.
Okay, and then you have school board members Sarah Layton and Hillary Durkin, both with their hands up. Do you want me to bring them in as panelists or as speakers?
Whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they want to do.
All right, ladies, I'm going to bring you in as panelists. Just hide your video if you don't wish to be seen.
Don't we hide video on?
Not as panelists.
Okay.
So ladies, you're in, you'll just need to unmute yourselves.
Hello?
We can hear you. Hello.
Oh, this is Hillary. Hi. So sorry, my view changed, so I can't see you guys anymore. And so I had a bunch of clarifications around the middle school laptop program, but it sounds like I'm too late for that. I had my hand up during that. But then I also, unless you're still interested in them, but I also had a clarifying question. It sounds to me like between your two amendments, so as I'm understanding it, you moved the laptops from being bonded to being appropriated, and then to offset that cost of the appropriations, you reduced the operating budget, which is separate from the capital budget, by $150,000. And then additionally, you also reduced the capital budget, the appropriated capital budget, by $50,000. So to me, that's a reduction of $200,000, which was more than the laptop. Am I not understanding that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things, Hillary. I think one, we didn't move. I mean, the laptops have always been an appropriation all the way through the budget process. It was only.
Sorry, yeah, I understand that. Right. So you retained it in appropriations, but
Yeah, I mean, Tom,
right.
We didn't take any action. Tom proposed that to us earlier this week, but we didn't take any action. It's always been appropriated.
Right.
And
So sorry, so I misspoke. I did know that, but in order to offset that appropriations, am I correct that you took $150,000 and removed it from the operating budget?
Well, no, we, in the numbers that we use that were prepared by Tom that we had looked at earlier in the week, because we moved it from, appropriations to budget, that adjusted that number. I mean, it basically came out of your operating budget because we moved it over to bonding in the exhibit that was done. Tom, I think probably at this point, the most helpful thing to do would be do the tax worksheets and see where this all falls out as compared to where we were. I mean, it's kind of hard to follow, but it's not like from the prior sheets that we have. It's hard to explain. That's not a direct reduction from the numbers you guys have been carrying. It's a reduction from the number that Tom produced last week, or earlier this week, that actually had added back $150,000 to your operating budget because he was proposing to move the laptops from appropriation to bonded. So
okay, so that was really unclear. So can I clarify again that the operating budget that we presented wasn't actually changed? It was Tom's proposal that you guys had discussed at your last finance meeting, and you had adopted. His proposal took the $150,000 from appropriations, added it to bonding, and then added it into our operating budget.
Yeah, that's right. And it was, this is really, we didn't table the meeting from Wednesday, but this is the part 2 of that meeting. Tom, we had been given those suggestions by Tom that you saw them the same time, at least I saw them, if you were watching the meeting. So
yeah,
we have, that's why we actually had this quick meeting again on Friday, because we had to digest what he had presented on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, he had moved some numbers, but I think, we're going back through basically what he presented and making our final call on it.
was that an accurate representation, or we confusing ourselves?
I think you're confusing yourself. Just be clear, there's a capital budget and there's an operating budget. And so by actions that you've taken today, you've certainly made changes to their capital budget by shifting back to or keeping it appropriated. But in addition to that, you modified and reduced, I should say, the operating budget by a similar amount, by 150. And remember, the exercise that I undertook earlier this week was to identify $530,000 in funding to ensure the pandemic costs were covered. And I expect those are technically operating funds. We're kind of talking about them separately, but I do expect that they are considered operating funds. They'll need to be. So
Yes, they will. But Tom, so I'm correct. You didn't add $150,000 back into our operating budget as a part of your proposal. You were just talking about covering the COVID costs with part of that $150,000. So now my understanding is that you've additionally reduced our operating budget by $150,000 by this amendment, as well as reducing the capital budget by an additional $50,000.
Right. But maybe a better way to look at it is what gets raised by taxes. So we break it out on the tax sheet, but what gets raised by taxes is what's appropriated along with the operating budget. So
right, but my point is, Peter was saying they're just taking out the $150,000 that Tom added in on his proposal, and that's not the case, as I understand it.
Hillary, I think you've properly reflected it. Yes.
Okay, so you are reducing the operating budget by an additional $150,000. Is that what you meant to do?
Maybe Todd, now I'm confused and sort of the adjustments we made. I thought we were working on, anyway, before the materials go out this afternoon, can you redo the tax calculation worksheets? The one, I'm assuming the one that we had worked off of on June 16th, which shows us with all these adjustments arriving at still at the mid-range, the 1.16%. We were going to the taxpayer ask was $69,989,970.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if you guys could work through, I know there's just lots of numbers at play here. Can you work through the numbers that we just did today and send us in the finance committee this adjusted tax worksheet so we can actually see the net impact of what we did today?
Certainly, and if it helps you, we can pull up the tax rate comp sheet, and I think I can modify it almost on the fly for you so you can see it real time. I say that, Ruth.
Yeah, well,
I'll send it out later if that's helpful.
Yeah, we're 2 hours in. I think there's some other questions, but I think.
Okay. Yep.
I'd like to see how that works through just to make sure, I may have confused myself. I just want to make sure so anyway, it'll be helpful to see where that arrives. And then if we need to make an adjustment, we can.
Okay, very well. I'll send it out right after.
So sorry, Peter, can I clarify, if that turns out to not be what you had in mind when you were doing your amendments, how would that be adjusted? Because this $150,000 removed from our operating budget is a lot of, that's a huge cost for the schools to absorb.
Yeah, Hillary, thank you for the question. As I said, I think we had so many conversations this afternoon. Tom needs to, when we take a look at the sheet, if it's not what we intended to do, I will work with my colleagues. If it's not what we intended to do, we will make the appropriate change before the second read, which happens next Wednesday.
Okay, thanks. I was just trying to gain clarity on that.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for putting it out. We may have confused ourselves. It's easy to do.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Are there other questions, Larissa?
Hey, I don't know if I missed my opportunity to speak. I was having some audio issues. Do you mind if I jump in now?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you. So this is just another clarifying point, and I I know it's been 2 hours, but I actually would find it very helpful if you guys could find a way to reconcile those numbers so we have that information available to us publicly now. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm looking at what we passed last night at our second reading, which is just looking at the operating budget. Our net budget total is about $48,437,000. And I think with the operating budget that you guys had put forward originally, it was about $47,800,000, and then you added the 533 for COVID in, and then reduced 150. So if you're following me still, we're at about $48,265,000, which still leaves a pretty big gap for the school, almost about $200,000. That's not including the CIP, so it'd be more for CIP. So I guess the reason why I'm asking this is because it's important that I know, and I understand why you guys have done the process the way you have, because you're going from what you approved at first reading. But I also think that when you talk about this next week, it's important that we show the delta between what the board has approved at their second reading and then what you guys are approving, because there's already, without reducing by another essentially $200,000, which you did today, there's already a delta that we're going to have to make up.
That's fair. I mean, at this point, the numbers for me are just, I'm more confused than not at this point. So I think those are great. So we will, I think you've heard Tom say we may have confused ourselves, Tom. He's got lots to do today, but you know, whether Tom will reproduce the sheets, we can reconnect. If it's not what we intended to do, then the finance committee will make the appropriate adjustments. And in a timely so Tom can still get out the materials.
Okay.
Council Hamel?
Yeah, I would like to comment. You know, this is a town council finance committee meeting. I'd like to highlight the fact that we're pretty generous in terms of allowing the public to participate, and for for having panelists chime in real time before we've even had a chance to to complete the analysis of the work that we've done just in the past 2 hours. So I'd just like to highlight the fact that I do not believe there's a similar opportunity for town councilors to participate in a fashion like that in school finance committee deliberations. So I just want to highlight the fact that we are going to great lengths to try to encourage and incorporate feedback, and I would hope that our folks that just weighed in would take that in the right spirit going forward. Thank you.
Am I still on?
Sure.
Yes, you can take us off, Don. Sorry, I also wasn't aware that you were a member of the finance committee, so I think that we're being afforded the same privilege that you are, and I appreciate that. So thank you.
I do too. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
You guys, Hillary, did you have something else, or you just wanted to?
No, I just wanted to be demoted and to say thank you for, I mean, I am a citizen too, so thank you for listening to my comments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the comments were
Thank
helpful. I think definitely the second read needs to reflect what the school board passed for the second read. And I'll just add that, I was the one who wanted to make an amendment to the motion of the 150K. So I understand where it is now. I'm comfortable with where it is now. It wasn't where I was going, but so I do really appreciate the clarified question though. I thought it was quite helpful.
Yeah.
Just something to think about. Obviously, working this stuff on the fly, we can't think through all the details, but it occurred to me that given that half of this middle school refresh project is already in the operating budget, a cleaner approach may have been to simply reduce the capital budget by 150,000 and increase the operating budget by an offsetting 150,000. That's something you guys can think about, but
Yeah, no, John, I'll rely on Tom. I'm not sure I processed it correctly either. So let's,
Yeah.
I think Tom's sheets will be very helpful to, and I think the question asked, did we do what we thought we wanted to do, or does it have unintended consequences? And if it's not what we wanted to do, Betsy just said that, then,
I think
I'll look back to everybody and, maybe we can do it. And if it's not the intent that we wanted, then we need to correct it. So
I think I understood what I voted for. And, so I'm okay with where we're at. The motion that I was going to bring forward was what John just said, was a 150 cut to the operating to the capital. And people are like, well, you got to specify the line item, whatever. And then no subsequent increase to the operating. So not quite what John brought forward, but I'm comfortable with where we are now. And I know what I voted on. So.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to see the, I think all of us would feel more comfortable once all of these changes we just talked about, and I think Tom and Ruth are clear about what they are. Let's see what it does to the tax comp, where we end up at the end of this process. And if it's not where we intended, then I'll reach back out to everybody.
Right, I totally agree. And of course, my perspective is a little different because I had wanted to, increase the municipal budget by 150, which would have adjusted that piece of the mill rate. So we'd be 100 different on the mill rate, whatever that equates to, because I would have increased by, if my motion had passed, it would have increased by 150, the municipal side. And then I think we have a $50,000 reduction on the school side at this point when all is said and done. So the mill rate would have been up just a little bit, but as it stands, that's not gonna, that motion failed. So I'll be bringing that forward separately and, hoping to find a way to pay for that 150, but I don't even want to say it that way. I just think it's the right thing to do for the employees of the town.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we still, if we're going to bring forth that COLA adjustment that you have suggested, I think there's support for, we're still going to have the same conversation about where does it get funded. So at the end of the
Exactly.
Anyway, Tom, do you have what you need? I know the time's ticking. I appreciate everybody's time. Tom, just let us know, John and Betsy, when you get that tax sheet, take a look and just let me know what you guys, John, you figured out in your head what it's done?
I think Ruth has.
I have the tax rate sheet. It's done.
What's that?
I do have the tax rate sheet done. The bottom line is that it reduces your total net budget by 50,000.
Well, that's what Tom.
It does reduce the school's operating budget by 150,000, just as the school board Hillary said, and it reduces the school's capital also by the 50,000. And so essentially, operating reduces the net budget for the school, and then the capital reduces 50,000. Or I can send that to somebody if they want, so you can take a look at it. Would that be easier?
Let us. It's all swimming for me right now. So
we'll huddle and then recirculate documents this afternoon to you all. Okay.
Yeah, great. And then John and Betsy then we can huddle this afternoon or whatever we need to do. Okay. Thanks for everybody's patience. This has been painful.
Ruth, Colette, and Larissa, can you stay on?
Yes.
Do
We have a motion? Yeah. John's motion. Seconded? Who seconded?
Second.
Peter. Counselor Hayes?
Yes.
Counselor Clucci?
Yes.
Counselor Glycine?
Yes.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Motion
everybody.